Welcome in everybody to Toby Talks Golf. Today we're breaking down the American Express, the tournament that every year looks simple, but every year finds a way to trick people. On paper, this tournament feels like a free-for-all. It's three different courses, wide fairways, perfect desert weather, and the scoring pushes 20 under or better every single year. But if you're one that actually watches this event or you followed it over the years, you know that the same types of player are going to show up every weekend, but it's not always the same names. It's the same types of profiles. It's not about who hits it the furthest. It's not about just grinding out pars. And it's not about getting a hot flat stick over the weekend. It's a mix of everything. The American Express rewards the players who are comfortable staying aggressive, who love attacking with wedges, and who don't panic when birdies start flying everywhere and the leaderboard is moving fast. And that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to walk through what this tournament really asks from its players, some big storylines coming into the week. Scottie Scheffler is finally back for the first time in 2026, and where I think some real opportunity is, whether you're just watching casually, betting the board, or just trying to understand what's expected of the players. We're going to jump in to some of those numbers and see what pops out to us. And as the week goes on, we'll continue to update with more numbers, more storylines throughout the week. But for this episode, we're just going to be setting the stage. Palm Springs, perfect conditions. It's the American Express, and this is Toby Talks Golf. Breaking down the courses for the week, this is one of the most unique stops on the PGA Tour simply because there are three different courses that the players will play throughout the week, and it's a 54-hole cut, not a 36-hole cut. So each guy will be guaranteed 3 days before the final day, and we're going to break down what the differences are in these courses. So for the first three rounds, the players will move on rotation through the Pete Dye Stadium course, the La Quinta Country Club, and the Nicklaus Tournament course. It's the same desert, same type of weather, but each of them are different tests for different types of players. We're going to start with the stadium course because this is where everything ends on Sunday, and it's the most important course of the week. It's the only course that the players will play twice, and it's a Pete Dye track, about 7,200 yards. It's a par 72, and it is the one with the most teeth throughout the weekend. It's not long, but it makes the players think about their next shot. Water comes into play on a handful of holes. Sightlines are uncomfortable. And Dye does what he simply always does. He is going to mess with the players' heads the best he can. Statistically, this is the hardest course in rotation. Last year, scoring here was 3 strokes harder than the other two courses. Still very gettable, but it's definitely more difficult than the other courses they'll play. And it's the only place where par is going to be a score that matters. There are some holes where par is a good score out here. You don't have to survive the course, but you can absolutely lose the tournament here, not just on Sunday, but on whatever other day the player decides to play it. It's going to reward strong iron players, good decision makers, and guys who can stay patient when the birdies aren't necessarily falling, when they're not as automatic as the other courses are. So you'll see some separation here late Sunday in those 20 other under rounds and scores towards the end of the tournament. This is where the separation will start to come, because it doesn't give anything away for free. And moving on from that course, we have the La Quinta Country Club. And this is basically the opposite vibe from the stadium course. It's the shortest course in the rotation, just over 7,000 yards. And it plays like one of those throwback resort tracks. Tree-lined fairways, elevation changes, some beautiful, breathtaking views throughout, and a whole lot of wedges, not just for the long players, but for the short players as well. Historically, this is the lowest scoring course on the PGA Tour, or one of the. Last year, the scoring average was under 69, and you will see routinely guys shoot in the low 60s here because you can attack pins, you pile up the birdies, and it's a spot to build momentum earlier in the week. You'll definitely see some of the leaders on the leaderboard after Thursday, after Friday, are guys who have already played this course. Don't be surprised if when you see a 62 on the scoreboard, it happened at La Quinta. This is the most gettable track. And the nice thing also about this track and all three courses until we get to Sunday is the pins are pretty easy. They never change day to day because obviously the players have to play the same pins, but they're not tucking them. They're allowing birdies to happen. They know that this is going to be a course where guys want to get after it, and they allow them to do so. The other thing about La Quinta is missed fairways are not a death sentence. Proximity matters way more than position. So you'll see a lot of guys just blast driver as far as they can, and wherever it goes, they'll find a way to get up and down, make those birdies still, because the rough is not going to be as much of a detriment here as it is other places. And that brings us to the final course to talk about, the Nicholas Tournament course. And this is also very easy. It's right up there with La Quinta. Again, wide fairways, very little rough. And this is the easiest in terms of sight lines. It's very easy looking off the tee. It fits the player's eyes really, really well. And it is set up to be attacked. You will see the scoring in those 68 to 69 range in the scoring average. And this is where you'll see the most volatility as well. There's lots of eagles to be had out here. You'll definitely see some birdie runs and leaderboard chaos. It's not necessarily one that is going to separate talent of the players, but it is one where you'll see players take advantage of their skills. And if you're looking to play the Nicholas course, you better shoot at least a few under par. Otherwise, you are going to be losing ground on the field. So when you put it all together, this tournament becomes a bit of a balancing act. You need to go low on La Quinta and Nicholas if you want to have a shot come Sunday, and you need to hold the ground on the stadium course, particularly in that first round. You can't force shots anywhere on this course or anywhere on these courses. Let it come to you. And this is why this event tends to reward those guys who are comfortable in birdie races, guys who aren't panicking when 25 under is on the table, because you can't go out there and say, I got to shoot 25 under. I got to make birdie here, 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 and here. You have to let the birdies come to you. These guys are all good enough where they can play the game and they can make a lot of birdies. But when you try to start forcing it, that's when it gets difficult, and that's when you start losing ground. So as we move forward, these courses are going to be a mix, and it's going to show up in the type of players that I am targeting this week. For our whole of the week, we're spotlighting the 16th at PGA West, the stadium course, and this hole is known as the San Andreas Fault. It's a reachable par 5 that stretches 600 yards, so yes, it's gettable for the best in the world, but don't let that fool you. This hole has a reputation for swallowing shots whole, and that's thanks to its monster greenside bunker, the deepest on tour at 18 feet below the green. Pete Dye designed this finishing stretch to punish even the best players in the world, and the 16th does that in spades. The bunker is notorious. It has steep walls, firm sand, and from the bottom of the bunker, you can't even see the green. To escape it, you need to launch the ball high enough, but also far enough to clear the lip, usually with a 55-degree wedge or more, some 56, some 50s, some 60s. You never quite know what the player is taking out. But the tough part is, if you misjudge it, you can end up back in the bunker and be looking at double bogey or worse if you do it multiple times. Or you could launch it so far over the green that you're in trouble then on the other side of it and are still staring at a bogey or double bogey. So this hole has been more than responsible for a handful of double bogeys over the past few years at the American Express. And that's why it's earned nicknames like the Monster, or it's been called Nightmare Fuel, because even the best players in the world struggle on this hole, and particularly if they put the ball in that bunker. So it's one of the most compelling holes from a fan perspective to watch all week long. And it makes it so interesting because most players would just try and avoid the bunker. But if you get tempted, it's a reachable par 5. It demands respect, but some players might get aggressive. And if they hook that 3-wood trying to get it to the green, it is going to punish you more than it may reward you. So it'll be a fun give and take balance for the players. But that bunker, it's got a personality of its own, and it's all ready to go to make a statement Thursday, Friday, Saturday out here for the American Express. But before we get into too many deep picks and too deep into the weeds of all of the statistics, this tournament has some really, really good storylines layered into it, even this early into the PGA Tour season. And let's start at the top. Scottie Scheffler, the favorite. He comes into the week sitting around plus 300 odds to win the tournament. It's his 2026 debut, so the first time we will see him after winning Player of the Year last year. And in a lot of ways, you'd think this feels like a typical Scottie spot. Great weather, perfect practice facilities, a low stress environment to ease into the season, and a place where ball striking is what matters most and what he is the best at on tour by far. He's done this before in past seasons. This is the first of the West Coast swing, and he tends to use these West Coast events to find a rhythm throughout his season, build that confidence, and get his game into form. And obviously, the resume speaks for itself. I believe it's 13 wins in the last 2 seasons. It's elite consistency week after week. He's right there, but this is the interesting part about the American Express for him. It sounds like it should set up beautifully for him, but this tournament has kind of been Scotty's white whale throughout his years of dominance. Is he's played it 5 times and he's only made the top 10 once. It's nothing disastrous, but he's just never really put it all together across all 4 days at the different courses. That doesn't isn't going to matter long term, because but it does add a layer of intrigue to this week if he can finally get over the hump and put pressure on the leaderboard of guys who are trying to chase down Scotty. Maybe especially he debuted a new driver late last year. He seemed like he was hitting it much better towards the end of the year, and that motivation to have a good start is added in the season debut. So I think all signs point to this being one of the weeks where he does crack the top 10, but it's nothing given, especially out here for him. So if Scotty clicks early and that ball striking is as good as we've seen it in past years, look out, world, because this tournament could be over before it even starts. But if he's a little rusty, if this field is definitely deep enough to keep it interesting throughout the week. And one of those guys in the field that is going to keep it interesting is defending champion Sepp Straka. He's maybe one of the most under-discussed elite players in the game right now. He's quietly climbed his way into inside the top 15 in the world, and his skill set fits this event almost perfectly. It's why he won it last year, and it's because he's precise off the tee. He controls his iron trajectories really well. He's one of the best at manipulating that. And last season, he had just enough putting to turn in some really good weeks and turn those into then wins as well. And that's how you win here. You match that ball striking, that proximity to the hole, and then you got to make the putts. I know I said that your flat stick doesn't have to be the hottest it ever has been out here, because you shouldn't have a ton of deep putts that you have to make, but you got to make those 8 footers. You got to make those 12 footers that you're leaving yourselves after hitting those wedge shots. And that's not a question of Sepp Straka's game. It's not that it isn't a fit, but it's about timing. It's about timing for everyone, but particularly Straka. He hasn't played a ton since last summer, and he looked solid toward the end of the year. He looked solid recently, but there's always that question of rust when you really haven't played a ton in the last, 4 to 6 months. It can be difficult to kind of get off and going, especially in a birdie sprint. You can grind out pars, but when you have to be routinely hitting shots inside 15 feet, it can be difficult if your game just isn't right there. But like I said, his personality lends himself to this event. He's very steady. He's not going to be one of those guys chasing, pushing to get as many birdies as he can. He's going to let the tournament come to him, and he's really good at stacking rounds. And if you can stack those first 3 rounds and put yourself in position on Sunday, anything can happen. So no one has gone back to back here in decades, which tells you how hard it is, especially with the mix of courses. But if you were building a prototype for someone who could do it, Straka checks a lot of those boxes. Not saying it's going to happen, but it's definitely worth watching. And another return that is worth watching here is a return just back to the tour. Will Zalatoris is making his return to a full field of PGA Tour play. This is his second. He's coming back off of his second back surgery in a very short span of time. And anytime that's the case, your expectations have to be tempered. I'm not saying that he's going to come out here and win it, but it's just really exciting to have one of the most fun guys back out on the tour. Early signs are encouraging. He played overseas throughout the winter and looked like he got more comfortable, got better back into his groove. And every single round, that swing looked pretty free. Coming off a back surgery, you never know what changes guys are going to make, if they're going to be hesitant to swing, to take that full hack at the ball. And he looked very strong throughout the winter and looked like he continually got stronger. And maybe most importantly, he looked comfortable in competition again. It's easy to go out to the range and blast balls and get your speeds back to where they were. But when the pressure mounts and you're playing against other players and you have that drive to win, that's where things can get a little bit dicey if you don't necessarily have that full confidence, or there's that voice in the back of your head saying, what's going to happen if you tweak this back? right now. But it's great to see him back in the field. He's one of those players where the ceiling is never going to be in question for him if he's healthy. He's been in major championships. He's had runner-up finishes in multiple events, lots of top tens on the biggest of stages. And the question is just health. How is his body going to handle these 4 days, these four different courses? Hopefully, he doesn't have to take as many swings if this does turn into a birdie fest. This isn't necessarily about him winning this week. It's just about tracking his progress. He doesn't need to be in contention. If he sniffs the top 15, that is a huge step forward and a big momentum boost going into the season. But this is a good spot to ease back in. It's not going to be the toughest course. You're not going to have to hit a ton of super strong shots out of super thick rough. So this is going to be one where it'll be fun to watch him just kind of ease back in. And it'll be fun to see him as we head into other events. And if he can get that confidence back up, he's always one that is fun to have out on the tour. There's also a few other names worth keeping an eye on out here. Ludwig Oberg is in the field for the first time this season. Matt Fitzpatrick, Adam Scott, all making starts at this event, which adds another layer of intrigue. Just more big names out here competing. We'll see how they adapt to the course rotation and how aggressive they choose or will be throughout the week. It's also worth mentioning that this is a President's Cup year. So both the U.S. players and international players will be trying to make stakes early to make those teams. And the early results don't lock anything in, but it's a very, very competitive field out here for a early tournament on the PGA Tour season. And some of these big names will definitely be able to make runs late Sunday. So when you zoom out of this, it's not just a birdie fest, but like we said, it's a season debut for the best player in the world, a title defense for one of the steadiest players on tour, and it's the return of major caliber players on the tour. Last week, you had some really good names in the field, but these are the guys that you expect to be competing week to week. And it's going to be interesting to see how this tournament unfolds with the Birdie-Fest. Now, with that all in place, let's dig into somewhere this value really sits on the board and how I'm going to approach this week from that standpoint. Obviously, when you get past Scottie at the very top, and we'll talk more about him later, this betting board opens up fast. Scottie sits around plus 300, which tells you two things. He's the best player in the field. There's no question about that. But also that the books are daring you to find value somewhere else. And honestly, this feels like one of those weeks where spreading exposure makes a lot of sense. After Scottie, there is a clear second tier in the betting. Ben Griffin, Ludwig Oberg, Russell Henley, Robert McIntyre, Patrick Cantley, and Siwoo Kim all living in that plus 2,000 to plus 3,500 range. And that's where this conversation gets interesting. Starting off with Ben Griffin, he's one of the names that, to me, just keeps coming back. He's not flashy. He's not one of those social media golfers, but his game travels really, really well. And his strength is that everything he does travels really, really well. Like I just said, he hits a ton of fairways. His wedges are elite, and he's comfortable making a lot of birdies. This feels like a very natural spot for him, and especially if this tournament turns into one where 22 under or 23 under wins, that consistency is going to matter instead of just one absolutely nuclear round. If you're looking for a guy who can be on the first page of the leaderboard all 4 days, Griffin fits that mold to a T. Then let's look at Ludwig Oberg and Russell Henley. And these are really two interesting guys to compare because they're priced very similarly, but they get there very differently. Oberg is elite ball striking, a very high ceiling, if not the highest on tour. And if he gets the putter going, there is no question about it that he can win this week. The hesitation, and this kind of is always the hesitation with him, is conversion. He creates tons of chances, but to win a tournament, you have to cash in on those chances. Henley, on the other hand, is pretty much the exact opposite. He's accurate, controlled, and incredibly reliable with his irons throughout the week and his wedges. The question is whether he can keep pace if this turns just into an absolute all out sprint. I don't hate either, but I think it's important to know what kind of bet you're making as to whether you want a guy with the high upside who could fall way down the leaderboard if it doesn't get hot, or a guy who you can expect to be right around there like Russell Henley and be really stable, but maybe not be able to quite crack into the top to be able to get to those 22 under, 25 under numbers. With that, Siwoo Kim and Patrick Cantley are other guys who are in that same money range and sit in a very similar spot for me. Siwoo Kim has legit history here, and this is a setup that minimizes his biggest weakness, a blow up hole. He is one of, if not the most aggressive players on tour. And while he can miss occasionally, he still recovers a lot because birdies are everywhere. And out here, it's tough to have a double bogey hole unless you completely dunk it in the water. But there are plenty of chances to make up for a bogey with lots and lots of birdies. Cantley, on the other hand, it's a little similar to that Oberg situation. Cantley is very, very steady. He's definitely a little less explosive than Siwoo Kim, but very, very comfortable on short courses where iron play is going to carry much of the load and wedges, and neither one jumps off a play as one of those guys that you have to play this week, but both make sense depending on how you're building the exposure of your lineup throughout the week. And some of these places where I'm willing to take some risk as well further down the board, there's lots of options. I really like this slate for high upside and low ownership names throughout the week. And that's what's really nice about these tournaments where it's a birdie fest, is because the ceiling of the player matters a lot more than the floor. Kevin Yu is a name that fits that mold, I think, very well. He's aggressive, he creates lots of birdie chances, and when the course setup is friendly, like this week will be, his strength shows up really fast. The risk, obviously, is the volatility of him. He can shoot 10 under on a day, or he could shoot 10 over out here. You never quite know. But that's why his ownership is going to stay down on a week like this. But if you're willing to take a risk and you want to separate from kind of the chalk of those upper echelon guys, you is a profile that is going to make a lot of sense this week. Someone who can go really low on Nicholas and La Quinta and can hang around at the stadium course, and if he goes low enough, he will be right in the mix come Sunday. I think Akshay Bhatia is another name that I really like. He's the definition of boom or bust so far on the tour. But if there's ever a spot to lean into the boom, again, it's here. This is a place where guys have to make a lot of birdies. They're going to be forced to get into a birdie race at some point throughout the week. And you're just taking a chance on whoever you think is going to go out there and score 60. That's both a basketball reference and a golf reference. You got to pick the guy who's going to go out there and make a lot of birdies, take a lot of chances, and is going to be able to convert on those chances. So Bhatia is really interesting because he's one of those guys who's very, very aggressive. He's going to go out there and attack pins. And if the flat stick is rolling, birdies are going to come in bunches for him. But yes, obviously the floor is very real for him as well. He's gonna make some mistakes throughout the week, and if he can bounce back from those mistakes, he's going to be a name that is going to be high up on this leaderboard. And I think even if he does make a couple mistakes, this event doesn't punish mistakes the way others do, and that's going to matter as this week rolls on. Now, if we look at some real long shots, there's a couple other names worth mentioning. I think Harry Hall is a guy that I really like here. He's not super flashy, but he fits the type of player that tends to like these types of setup. He's got some really strong value, and he's not necessarily a safe play, but he's an opportunity play if you so choose. And then let's look at some names that, maybe are some question marks, some names that you might want to play, but maybe don't fit this situation the best. Justin Rose, I think, is one of those guys. He's a very good iron player, and he's capable of a very strong finish. But for an outright win, his equity just feels a little bit limited. I don't think he can keep up with all of the birdies out that are going to be out there this week. Same thing with Adam Scott. The ball striking is still there, but you're betting heavily on his irons to carry a load and go after a lot of pins. And he just doesn't quite fit that type of mold. And then there's Jason Day, who's kind of a balance here. When he's healthy and confident, he can absolutely spike and be up there with those birdies and bunches. But the risk is he's not necessarily always there. The risk is baked into the price because he is priced so high. So he's not necessarily a bad play. None of these guys are bad plays, but there are plays you have to make with intention. They're probably not going to win it outright, so you got to find value elsewhere. So zooming out then after all of that information, before we get into actual picks for this week, again, this is a week to not to this is not the week to overvalue somebody. It's not a distance course where you need somebody who's going to hit it really far. It's not a tough course where you're expecting the best of the best to emerge, or to be able to grind out lots of pars. This is a week to learn into those guys who can make a lot of birdies, who are comfortable going low and not afraid to play super, super aggressively. And they can't panic. These guys have to be able to, and really all of them are. So this is, separating apples and oranges a little bit. It's about when the scoring goes crazy low, if they're not going to panic and try and force it. All of these guys can go crazy low, but it's about that mindset when maybe on Thursday somebody posts 12 under and they're sitting at 5 under and they're thinking, "Oh, I'm 7 back. What am I going to do?" You can't necessarily think like that. You just got to let the next day come to you. And so that's how I'm approaching it in terms of guys who I think can have that type of mentality, but also post a score of 10 under when they need to. So, as we look to wrap this up, the American Express, again, is just such a fascinating start to the West Coast swing. It's deceptively simple, lots of wide fairways, low stress conditions, and it is going to be a birdie fest. On paper, it looks simply like a birdie fest, but the reality is there's going to be a certain profile that fits the mold. It's not just about the ability to make birdies. It's going to be those guys who are best with their wedges, who are comfortable when it gets time to be super, super aggressive. And that's why putting from scoring ranges will tell you a lot more this week than just who is going to hit it the furthest. Scheffler back making his season debut. Sepp Straka looking to defend his title. Will Zalatoris returning from surgery. Tons of great storylines throughout this week that we covered, and lots more are going to show up throughout the week. It's going to be tons of fun. There are going to be new faces that pop up and that are going to surprise us. Looking forward to see who those are. And ultimately, this event is a scoring contest. It is going to be so much fun to see these guys just fire off birdies. I know that we all like to see them be humans and struggle, but every now and then it's nice to see how good these guys really are on a golf course that is gettable. And these three different courses, this rotation is going to create those opportunities to see them do it in little bits of different elements here and there. And who knows? Someone unexpected could really steal the spotlight out here, and that's part of the magic. You never quite know who is going to ride that birdie wave all the way to the top. So whether you're tracking storylines or just admiring the golf, or just simply following the guy you like best, keep an eye on that mix of experience, momentum, and aggression out here. The American Express is going to reward bold play this week, and the players willing to go low will define this tournament. It's going to be tons of fun. I really appreciate you tuning in if you watched this far. I'm Toby Talks Golf, and I will catch you on the fairways next time. I hope for the best that you all have sunshine and plenty of birdies as you watch this tournament.